Good evening. Many of you have seen this slide several times. I think it's important, and we can't overshare the importance of having guidelines going into the budget season. And what you see in front of you are the guidelines that our collaborative decision-making group in Pittsford called the District Planning Team used in order to help facilitate the budget planning for this round. I do want to highlight some areas in the budget guidelines. This is the first year that we've actually had to use them twice. And we used them the first round, and we thought that everything that was in the budget and everything that was taken out of the budget were directly aligned to the budget guidelines. And for the second round, it became much more difficult as we decided that we had to cut a significant amount from the levy. So first and foremost, it's unequivocally the most important thing for everyone, all the stakeholders that are serving on the district planning team, and I think all the stakeholders in our community, and certainly the Board of Education, is to make sure that we prepare a budget that's best for our students, that we have a budget that's going to allow for the robust opportunities for our students in a wide range of ways to service the whole child. So we look at making sure we're able to provide the rigor, level of engaging curriculum, and at the same time provide them the outlets that make Pittsford special. And that's making sure we maintain our excellence in music, in arts, in STEM, in STEAM, in extracurricular clubs and activities, and social emotional supports. And all of that is pulled together into a student-based budget. We also feel it's extremely important that we, like any good business, would maintain being as current as possible and best practices. And things evolve in education quite rapidly, and it's critical that our staff is receiving the highest quality professional development. We also felt it was important that we have a strong focus on social and emotional learning. And if you recall, some of the areas that we talked about in the budget were increasing the hours to Pittsford Youth Service, which is one of the areas that has stayed in the second budget because of the importance it is for us to be able to provide services for kids to make sure that mentally and socially, emotionally they are doing well. Without that, you have too many significant barriers to learning and to their self-esteem, and to them advancing being the best person they can be. We also wanted to manage the impact of investment in education with an understanding that there's limited resources. We had reduced the budget several $1 million during the budget process to get to the point where we felt we were comfortable to bring it to vote. We have since reduced it more to get us under the tax cap. So I think that one of the main differences between this budget and the budget prior is that we will be under the tax cap, which means that sensitivity will certainly yield the rebate checks that we heard concerns from several of the residents. Fiscal stability in the future. We have, and you've heard me say this 100 times, and you've seen Darrin talk about this many times, our bond rating has helped us out significantly. We're wrapping up a project that is going to be under its estimate. We're going to wrap up a project that has yielded less than anticipated, in part because of our bond rating. We also, over time, have looked in the last contracts to look for efficiencies, and every single bargaining unit has made concessions in healthcare, and our healthcare has actually performed extremely well, especially compared to industry standards. And we also want to provide fiscal stability in the future. And a big part of that has been looking at our reserve accounts. We've talked quite a bit during this budget process about when to use reserves and when not to use reserves. And the golden rule for reserves are using it for those one-shot deals and making sure you have a plan to backfill the reserves. So if you take out $1 million, that you have a plan the following year to put $1 million back in. Our reserves are healthy. Our comptroller has praised us on our reserves. Our auditors have praised us on our reserves. We feel that we are, not that we feel, we know that we're looking very strong moving into the future relative to finances. The end in mind, obviously, is to basically to remain Pittsford. That means that we remain the best that we can be. We remain the best that there is in the state. We remain to be the best in the nation. And our end in mind, obviously, is to provide our kids the best experiences possible while they're with us, with the notion that when they're not with us, that they're prepared to move forward in any endeavor they choose. As we met and regularly meet as a district planning team and beyond, anyone that has a budget, we scour their budget areas. We look for efficiencies, we look for trade-offs. And one great example that hopefully will be approved this evening is a trade-off with a course. So for example, we're looking at bringing in a new course with cybersecurity, and on the flip side, something will have a hiatus. And we've done that year after year. So instead of continuing to grow program and staffing, what you should be seeing is that we're maintaining and changing and evolving with the times. I think this is important, and I can't stress all of these things enough, and we can have 5 million slides on this. Simply put, there's not a better school district in this area than Pittsford. And I'm obviously biased because I'm the superintendent of Pittsford. I've been here for over 20 years. I've been to a lot of schools. I've actually evaluated other schools for New York State. And I've never seen or been part of a better family than the Pittsford Central School District. We have statistics that you can put up against anyone. I sent an email out this morning. Actually, last week I sent several emails out. The first one said we were #1 out of 7 counties in ELA. The next one said we're the best in 7 counties at the middle school in ELA, high school math, et cetera, et cetera. And this morning we got an email that says we're the best in the 431 school districts in the 48 counties north of the 42nd parallel. Not quite sure where the 42nd parallel is, but I thought that was really cool to include. So when I think about a sense of pride, and it's in part because we do it so well here. We know what we're doing. We do it all the time. We're responsive, and our students, bar none, are leaving here with one of the best educational experiences possible. So when we think about a budget, and again, I want to reiterate that we were the #1 rated school out of 431 school districts in the 48 counties north of the 42nd parallel. On top of what you see there, and on top of so many other things, the budget connection is very simple, is that we have resources that we use effectively and efficiently to be responsive to our students' needs. And we're able to provide a very robust experience for our students. And we pay a lot of attention to individual students with different needs. But what you'll see later in the presentation, which is pretty critical, is that we're able to offer a breadth and a depth of courses and opportunities and supports for our students. But at the same time, we're under the average of the New York State per pupil cost, which is pretty significant. So when you put all that together, I'm hoping that what you're able to see is that you have a very responsible and responsive budget as we move forward. I'm going to turn it over to Darrin with some of the numbers behind the story. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to start this part of the presentation looking at the proposed 2017-18 budget in a format in which the board and the district commonly looks at. This is summary information, but for each one of these objects of expense, there's hundreds of budget codes for most of them. But when you put it all together, salaries, for example, 1.9% increase in the salaries, This is affected by the fact that we had retirements this year, also some positions that we wouldn't be filling, and due to sectioning, some minor changes here and there, the number of teachers, et cetera. It equates to about 13 less full-time equivalent positions for the 17-18 year than we currently have. So that percentage of increase is not as high as we've seen in other years. Benefits, area of a lot of focus. Some good news on the benefits front. The retirement systems, both teachers' retirement, employees' retirement systems, the employer contribution rates have come down for the 17-18 year, more so on the teacher retirement system side, as well as Mike referenced earlier, the performance of the Rochester Area Schools Health Insurance Plan. It's a consortium of all the schools in the area. Last year was a tough year as far as the claims history, but overall it performs much better than the community rated plans. And so a little over a 4.6% increase to that area. So going on down through the rest of it, I'm going to draw your attention to the BOCES. You'll see a decrease in the BOCES. Part of that is driven by we're opting out of some of the BOCES services and going to offer them in-house, such as for the speech language pathologists. There's some cost savings from doing it that way, as well as the quality of service will be enhanced by having them as our own employees, and they're spending less time on the road and more time working with students. Moving down to the debt service, that's a 24% increase. That one seems to stand out, obviously. That's in relation to the 2012 capital project that the voters already approved. And at that time, the voters approved us issuing debt to pay for that project. 17-18 year will be the first year of the actual debt payments, similar to what you would have with a mortgage, for example. You'll see on the revenue side in a few minutes that there's an offsetting revenue coming into that called building aid that offsets over $1.6 million of that. And then in future years, there's going to be an additional aid that comes in that offsets all but about $50,000 to $60,000 of that money.
So Darrin, I think it's important to note that unlike a mortgage, that you have a consistent payment over 30 years or 15 years. This is a payment that starts high and goes low.
And it moves a little bit throughout the period of time. Interfund transfers, the $62,000 increase, excuse me. Little bit of a change in what the state is requiring us to do for summer handicapped students and how we account for them. So we actually have to transfer money out of the general fund into the special aid fund, and that's what that's for those increased costs. When at the completion of the program, we file paperwork and we get some of that money back from the state, but this is the accounting treatment for it, so that's why you see a change there. So overall, it's a little over $130 million proposed budget, or a 3.63% increase. Next, I'm going to transition to what the state calls the three-part budget, and this goes back to 1998, and the state's intent here was for all schools at the budget hearing to present their budgets in a standard format to the taxpayers. There still is some room for interpretation in some schools, budget a little bit differently, and they might account for things in some different codes, but at least the format is pretty much the same. We choose to do it for the most part graphically. There's also, I'll show you in a little while, where you can get greater detail to it. So the three-part format, there's three main components to it. There's the administrative component, and the way to think of that is supervisory roles that is not directly involved with interacting with students. So this would be everything from district office to the main offices in the school buildings, including clerical support, etc. Another key factor to note there is once people retire, regardless of where they work in the district, their retiree health insurance gets accounted for in this section of the budget. Program is specifically that. Basically think of anybody that directly involves services to students. So for example, transportation is included in that because it's providing those services. Then capital is basically infrastructure. It's your debt service on the buildings, it's operations and maintenance in buildings and grounds for maintaining facilities. So when you look at it, we are under 10% of our total budget is administrative. That's one of the factors that still makes us eligible for administrative efficiency aid with the New York State. We are not the type of school district they had in mind when they created that, but we still qualify. And about 75% of our budget goes directly to program. Giving you a little bit of a historical perspective on the three components. You can see that the administrative has been pretty flat. some increases over time that would be expected in the program. It's well under 3% over time for that. And on the capital side, it's about 2.6% over that period of time, average annual increase. Diving down a little bit deeper into the administrative component, the types of things that are there, as I mentioned earlier, would be the main offices and on those that support that office in the schools, special education office, office of instruction, support services, which would include finance, personnel, public information, technology, and printing. Central administration is the superintendent's office and the Board of Education. And then the related employee benefits. The caveat there, as already mentioned, is that does include the retiree benefits. So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to predict because we don't know for sure if retirees are going to change their health insurance plan, et cetera. But you can see where the drivers have been over the period of time. Moving on to the program component, or what I call the educational component. Same types of things, regular education, special education, but this is for the teachers and the people directly providing services to the students, one-to-one aides, et cetera, and right on down through it. And you can see both where the trend has been over the period of time as well as where the bulk of the money is within that component. So about almost $48 million is in the regular education instructional side. Capital is simpler, if you will. The buildings and grounds, operations and maintenance has experienced a slight decrease over time. And if you look at it over that 5-year period, it's actually almost the exact same number as it was 5 years ago. Some of the help to that has been the utility cost reductions that we've all experienced, as well as this last capital project. We've experienced a lot of efficiencies from the new infrastructure systems. In the middle section there, you can see the increase for the debt service that we talked about, and the benefits are fairly flat for that area. Some of that has to do with the latest contract negotiations for the bargaining unit. That's both or for the operations maintenance bargaining unit. New employees are paying a higher percentage of their health insurance. This is another required piece that we're supposed to cover tonight from the state, and all these numbers come from the state. It's called the Fiscal Accountability Supplement. Last year they actually had an error in it, but this year, from what we can tell, it's pretty accurate. So basically what it does is it takes the per pupil cost, and when the state does it, they have certain things that they include in the cost and certain things that they back out. But they're applying it equitably across the entire state, and they compare us to a similar district, similar demographics, as well as the New York State average. So looking at general education or regular education, our per pupil cost is about 22% less than a similar district, or 6% less than an average district. They do the same thing for the special education piece. We are trending a little higher than both a similar district and all of New York State. Part of that is what I call economies of scale. Our percentage of students with needs is much lower than the average school district throughout the state. So you lose some economies of scale there. Looking at when you combine the two, though, we are still below on both, about 20% less than a similar district and 8% less than the New York State average. So we saw the appropriation or the expenditure side of the budget. Now, how do we pay for the budget? Where does the money come from? So the first thing on the revenue picture is the property tax levy, and that's 2.7% more than the current year's tax levy. That's within the tax cap, and that represents about 75% of our support. State aid, you see a pretty big increase there of almost $1.9 million. 1.6 million of that has to do with the building aid for the capital project. So our state aid continues to be a challenge as far as getting those increases each year that the governor talks about, and we'll see more on that in a few minutes. The sales tax is finally starting to trend up on the revenue. We get a percentage or a portion of the sales tax that Monroe County collects. It was declining for a number of years, and it's starting to trend back up. Interest earnings are still a challenge and decreasing. Miscellaneous revenue is all those small things added up together, and it comes up to a pretty decent number, but it's everything from health and welfare services when we bill other school districts who have students coming into our school district to get health and welfare services from private schools within our district. We bill them for those services. They do the same for our kids that are in their districts. So it's things of that nature. Fund balance and reserves, we're appropriating about $1.5 million, a little more than that, of our fund balance. Fund balance is simply a savings account, if you will. It's what's left over at the end of the year, and it's allowed to accumulate up to a maximum of 4% of next year's budget. So we've elected to withdraw from that account, if you will, to help fund this budget. We've done that for a number of years, as well as we're going to use from some of the reserves. A reserve is also an accumulation of surplus money, but per the state, there are specific things that it can be used for. So we have a number of reserves for that purpose. So for example, unemployment. We're going to take $50,000 out of the unemployment reserve to pay anticipated unemployment costs. And that's all part of this right here. So the property tax cap is 2.72%. We're underneath that. Foundation aid, we'll see a little more on this in a second, but we're owed about $75.5 million in foundation aid from New York State at this time. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about foundation aid because it is exactly what it says. It's the foundation of the revenue support for most school districts. Most school districts, they get more state aid than they have tax levy. Us being a low needs or higher wealth district, we're the opposite of that. But it's a key component in driving a school's decisions. When this came about in the mid-2000s, it was in response to New York State actually losing a campaign for fiscal equity. They filed a lawsuit against New York State, and the courts ruled that the New York State's funding formulas and practices for schools was unconstitutional. The key issues were the formula wasn't being followed, the formula was flawed, and school districts didn't know in advance what they were going to be getting. So the result of the foundation aid was record increases. Schools were supposed to know 4 years in advance what their aid would be. Unfortunately, that has never actually come to pass. So the state is not following the law or the formula, and the process continues to be an annual political process. This year, we didn't know until after the state was supposed to legally have a budget what our aid picture would be. So this chart shows the history of foundation aid since its inception. The blue bars are what the district was supposed to have received based on what our enrollment was and some other factors if the law ran as the formula is written. The red indicates what we actually received. So basically, foundation aid was frozen once you got to the 07-08 year. In the 10-11 year, the state couldn't afford to pay even the frozen aid, so they called it what they called gap elimination adjustment. There was a formula to reduce it further. The green line shows, I call it that, the belly. That's what we are owed. And when you look at that over that period of time, it adds up to just almost $75.5 million worth of state aid that we were supposed to receive in this district. When you do your income tax return for New York State, you have to put in your school district code. This is why. This is how they understand what the property values are in your school district and your income levels, and that drives the aid formula. So moving on to contingent budget. And basically our only option right now is we can only have this one vote that we have on June 20th. If that vote is not successful, we must go to a contingent budget. And the contingent budget now, within the days of the property tax cap, says that the tax levy can't be any more than it was the year before. It's not based on an expenditure number or anything like that, as it was in previous years. However, there are certain costs that are not allowed to be in a contingent budget. For example, any health and safety, non-health and safety related equipment or equipment that's required to preserve your facilities cannot be in the budget. Community use of school facilities may or may not be permitted. The key is that there cannot be a cost to the school district if we allow use of the school facilities. If we were to go to a contingent budget, it would be approximately $127.5 million. And to get there, we'd have to do $2.6 million in additional reductions from the budget that you just saw previously. So some key points to keep in mind. The 17-18 proposed budget for the revote is a little over $130 million, and it represents a 3.6% total increase, and that includes the debt piece, which has already been approved. The estimated tax levy is $97.8 or almost $97.9 million, 2.7%, That is within the property tax cap, so we need a simple majority, which is 50% plus one voter of all the voters that come out. Based on the way the law is written at this time and my understanding of it, this means that everyone would be eligible for the credit check, as well as they would get the full STAR exemption, because we're not growing by more than the 2%. We try our best each year to estimate what the tax rate will be. However, this is a formula that has 6 variables to it. Right now, we only know one of them, being the tax levy. But based on the historical trends and some other data, we try to project out, for example, what the assessments will be, et cetera. And based on that projection, we're projecting that the tax rate will go up 45 cents or 1.8%. And the impact on the average home, $250,000 assessed home, that's getting the basic STAR, would be $99 increase in the property taxes. So this is just a quick snapshot of what you'll see on the ballot. It's just the actual resolution which the board approved when they adopted the budget a few weeks ago. It just spells out, as you've seen, that it's $130,064,000 budget, and then authorizes the Board of Education in August to levy taxes necessary to support that budget. On our website, if you want additional information to get more detail, for example, on the 3-part budget, there's a link right here, and when this website gets uploaded, you should be able to click that link. But also, if you go on our budget page, you can get there right from the main page. And scroll to the bottom, there's a list of all of our presentations. For example, go to the proposed Revote budget information book. That is the public budget document that the state requires, so it has the detail on the 3-part budget. It has other things that are required to be in there, such as the fiscal accountability supplement, the school report card, which also has educational information and performance data, and the like. So you can get that information, or you can go to any one of our school buildings in the main office, and there'll be a hard copy of that for your review. So with that concludes the presentation. I open up for questions or comments.
Thank you, Darrin. Does anybody on the board have any questions, comments? No? Thanks, Darrin. Nice job. I know it's been a ton of work for you and Leanne and everyone else, like everyone in the district, for such a quick turnaround. We appreciate it. Thank you.